Remember the tale of The Boy Who Cried Wolf? It made for an amazing bedtime story, didn't it? But what if we told you that Aesop's fables, including this classic tale, had underlying meanings you would never have seen as a child? That's right, beneath their seemingly simple surfaces, stories like The Fox and the Grapes and The Tortoise and the Hare conceal nuanced commentary on human nature, flaws, and frailties. Upon closer examination, we may discover that they are not just charming bedtime stories, but also deep reflections on our own strengths, weaknesses, and experience. With this in mind, let's revisit Aesop's fables through the lens of adulthood. There's a lot to unpack, but before we deep dive into it, let's talk a bit about Aesop's legacy, his inspiration, and how his stories have been passed down for thousands of years. The mystery surrounding Aesop invites a fresh level of intrigue to his fables. It's difficult to imagine that a man who never wrote a single word managed to influence storytelling, morality, and even psychology for over 2,500 years. But that's who Aesop is. According to Greek history, he was an ancient storyteller believed to have been a servant who wove tales so powerful that they survived long after his time was over. The tales have been passed down from generation to generation like a verbal torch and are now known as Aesop's Fables. But let's be real here. The truth is, there isn't so much that we know about the man himself. In fact, some historians even speculate that he never existed and was more of a mythical figure attached to a collection of fables. But tradition says the man was born around 620 BCE, possibly in Thrace, Phrygia, or Ethiopia. Reportedly, he was enslaved and gained his freedom through his wit and intelligence. If this is true, it's fascinating, because it means that many of the world's most famous moral lessons about power, deception, and survival were formed by a man who had once been at the very bottom of society. But that's probably why his fables reverberate so deeply. They weren't stories written by kings or scholars or simply for the upper echelon of society. Instead, they were for everyone. Aesop's tales managed to do something that bound both the poor and rich of society. They stripped status and titles off, switching everyday life struggles into simple but piercing lessons. However, we can't help but wonder why he told his stories through animals, even though these animals are often more human than we'd like to admit. There have been many interpretations as to why he chose animals as a representation of humanity. Perhaps it was his way of ensuring he never stepped on any toes. Take a look at it this way. Aesop lived in a world where speaking truth to power could potentially be dangerous, but he wasn't going to let this stop him. Instead, he devised a clever way of telling stories that masked social and political criticism in tales of foxes, lions, and mice. Plus, considering his background at the very bottom of the totem pole, it might have been a lot easier for people to accept wisdom from a talking tortoise. He crafted short, punchy stories with sharp morals that even someone with the tiniest bit of attention span could read and understand. And boy did it work, because today these stories have been embedded into cultures all around the world so deeply that we still use phrases like sour grapes, crying wolf, and slow and steady wins the race today. Today, these tales are still with us, only they've been rewritten, reimagined, and even turned into bedtime stories and cartoons. But the fact that they still remain in circulation today means only one thing. The stories carry the universal truth that human nature hasn't changed much in 2,500 years. So, while Aesop may or may not have been real, his lessons are immortal. In this video, we'll be revisiting some of his more popular fables, starting with The Tortoise and the Hare. Ah, the timeless tale of the tortoise and the hare. A little unrealistic if you ask us, but still packed full of moral lessons. While this fable in particular leaves room for a more modern criticism, especially for adults, it's also widely referred to as the slow burn story of success. The story is pretty straightforward. It's about a speedy hare who loved to brag about how fast he was. He would hop around laughing at the other animals, especially the slow-moving tortoise. One day, the tortoise, tired of hearing the hare's boasting, challenged him to a race. The hare burst into laughter. A race? With you? This will be too easy. But the tortoise simply smiled. When the race began, the hare zoomed ahead, leaving the tortoise far behind. Confident he had plenty of time, the hare decided to take a nap under a tree. Meanwhile, the tortoise kept moving. Although he was slow, he was also steady and never stopped. By the time the hare woke up, he was shocked to see the tortoise near the finish line. He sprinted as fast as he could, but it was too late as the tortoise had already crossed the finish line. The animals cheered, and while the hare hung his head in shame, the tortoise simply said, "Slow and steady wins the race." From that day on, the hare learned a valuable lesson about overconfidence and consistency. Let's be real, as kids, this gave us the confidence boost we never knew we needed. It was inspiring, a pep talk for the underdog and wallflowers. The fact that you aren't as fast as the others doesn't mean you can't win. In fact, one modern proverb influenced by this story says, "It's not about how fast, but how well." Now that we are adults, however, this story is more than just a tale of being steady with our eyes set on the prize. It takes on a whole new meaning that touches on ambition, self-sabotage, and the strange, unpredictable ways life unfolds. How so? Well, at first glance, the lesson seems obvious. Consistency matters. It's something we often tell ourselves when trying to push our small businesses out on Instagram or TikTok, for example. Keep being consistent and one day you just might go viral and hit your target audience. But does consistency matter more than raw talent? Take, for example, the hare. He's gifted with natural speed and should have won easily, but since he underestimated the race, assuming his abilities alone would guarantee victory, he inevitably lost. The tortoise, on the other hand, never had speed to rely on, but he moved forward with quiet determination, didn't rush, didn't panic, and in the end, that made all the difference. The fable is honestly an accurate representation of what adulthood feels like. We all start out at different paces in life, with some shooting for the stars, seemingly destined for success, while others slog along, feeling left behind. But the thing is, talent and a strong start don't always determine the outcome. Sometimes the ones who take their time and who keep moving despite setbacks are the ones who make it in the long run. But can we talk about the hare for a moment? Every story needs to have a villain and a good guy to balance things out. As kids, the hare was the villain of the story, not because he did anything particularly villainous, but because he was cocky and underestimated the tortoise, perhaps just like a bully would. But as adults, we can see him for what he really is. Not a bully, but a classic case of wasted potential. The hare wasn't just fast, he was too fast for his own good, meaning his biggest enemy wasn't the tortoise, but himself, as his downfall came not from the lack of ability, but from his own complacency. And just how many times do we see this happen in real life? The answer is a lot. We've seen students who coast through school on natural intelligence, but they never learn discipline. We've seen the employee who's undoubtedly brilliant, but also procrastinates. In fact, we might even be that employee, or the star athlete who thinks they don't need to practice because they're just that good. And then there's the tortoise. As kids, we admired him for his perseverance, but as adults, we understand him on a deeper level. He represents quiet resilience, the kind of strength that doesn't rely on flashiness or shortcuts. His success wasn't about proving anyone wrong, it was about proving himself right. How many times have you caught yourself trying to do something to prove that you can do it? Many times. It's one of the reasons we felt so drawn to the tortoise, and not just because he was the underdog. So, does consistency matter more than talent? Maybe it's not an either-or situation. Maybe the real key is a balance, having the talent but also the discipline to nurture it. Because at the end of the day, the tortoise won not just because he was steady, but because he never stopped moving forward. And if the hare had done the same, the story might have ended very differently. Perhaps that's the real lesson of the tortoise and the hare. It's not just about patience, but about trusting the process and knowing that speed means nothing without direction, and that the race isn't always won by the one who starts off the fastest, but by the one who refuses to stop. But if we look at it from another perspective, this fable honestly just feels like straight-up workplace trauma. Because let's be honest, in real life the hare doesn't lose. He wins, gets promoted, and the tortoise is still filling out Excel sheets in a cubicle. Unless, of course, the hare self-sabotages, which, to be fair, happens a lot. So perhaps the real moral lesson is, be the hare, but don't be a fool. For the boy who cried wolf, Aesop takes a different approach, but the fable still has a very deep lesson, especially in our modern era. With the rise of the internet came something we never knew would drive us all insane: clickbait. But before the internet, the original clickbaiter, at least according to Aesop, was the boy who cried wolf. His story is pretty straightforward. A shepherd boy was bored while watching the village sheep, so he cried out, "Wolf! Wolf!" even though there was no wolf. The villagers came to help, only to find the boy laughing at his prank. This happened twice, with the villagers falling for the trick both times. But when a wolf really appeared, the boy cried out again, "Wolf! Wolf!" However, the villagers, remembering his previous lies, didn't believe him. They thought it was just another one of his pranks, and they didn't come to help. The wolf attacked the sheep, and the boy was left to face the consequences of his actions. As children, we are taught that the moral lesson of the story is that liars will not be believed, even when they tell the truth. And this is true. When you lie repeatedly, people will eventually stop trusting you, and it can have serious consequences. But this sounds like a moral lesson directed at children. After all, what sane adult would constantly lie to get people's attention, right? Wrong. We see people do this every day. Maybe not in person, but especially online. Clickbait videos with misleading titles and thumbnails meant to get people to click for likes and views, posts filled with misinformation merely to get a reaction going in the comment sections, or what we like to call ragebait. Even centuries after Aesop's boy who cried wolf, it's pretty obvious that many people still didn't catch the deeper meaning of the story. But unlike what we learned as children, there's more than one moral lesson to be derived from this, one of which is that people should learn to listen more. Just hear me out. Traditionally, the story is told as a straightforward morality tale. The boy lied, so he suffered the consequences. But what if we ask a different question? Not just one that revolves around what he did, but why he did it. At first glance, the boy's actions seem like simple mischief, but if we dig deeper, we might find something more complex. He's a child, left alone in a field watching sheep all day. Maybe he's lonely. Maybe he's bored. Maybe he's desperate for connection, for a break in the monotony, for someone to acknowledge him. And what do the villagers do? They scold him, dismiss him, and eventually ignore him altogether. But what if, instead of just punishing the behavior, someone had asked him, "Why do you do this? Do you want company? Is there something else you'd rather be doing?" What if, instead of leaving him alone with responsibilities he isn't ready for, they helped him find something better suited to his abilities? We are not trying to say that consequences don't matter. No, as adults we know more than anyone that they do. But sometimes bad behavior isn't always about defiance. It's a signal, a cry for something more. So what's the bigger lesson? The villagers fail in their own way. They assume he's simply being difficult rather than considering why he keeps repeating the same mistake. In the end, both the boy and the villagers suffer for not looking beyond the surface. And isn't that true in real life? How often do we judge people based on only their actions, without stopping to understand their motivations? How often do we ignore our own patterns of behavior without asking, why do I keep doing this? What am I actually looking for? From this perspective, the real lesson here isn't just about lying. It's about making an honest effort to understand ourselves and others, rather than just taking everything at face value. Because sometimes people don't cry wolf just to cause trouble. Sometimes they're crying out for something they don't know how to ask for. Interestingly, some adults have other different takes on this tale. One internet user shared that he would have instead done some physical exercises to beat up the wolf when it attacked his sheep. He wouldn't ask for help from anyone. And this is honestly another interesting philosophy that only adults can bring to the story. It's a perspective shaped by independence, self-reliance, and maybe a little bit of cynicism. As kids, we saw the fable as a simple lesson about honesty, but as adults, we start questioning the deeper implications. Why did the boy have to rely on the villagers in the first place? Shouldn't he have been prepared to defend his sheep himself? After all, he was a shepherd. In fact, was his real mistake lying about the wolf, or was it assuming that people would always come to his aid? Or was it even not preparing enough in case a real-life wolf came to attack his sheep? This perspective speaks to how adulthood changes us. We learn, of the hard way, that help isn't always guaranteed. If you cry out too many times, whether out of boredom, insecurity, attention-seeking, or even in need of genuine help, you won't always have people running down to your aid. Some people take this to mean trust no one and handle things yourself, while others see it as a reminder to be responsible with their words because trust, once broken, is hard to rebuild. Finally, we've got the story of the fox and the grapes, a fable that teaches against the art of pretending you didn't want it anyway. We're all guilty of this. We try so hard to get something, but it feels so far away, and in the end we just give it up. After all, it's not like we wanted it anyway. We simply wanted to see if we could get it. Insert a sneezing emoji, cause it's pretty obvious that this is a lie. In this story, a fox spots a juicy bunch of grapes, but try as he might, he just can't reach them. After a while, he gives up, muttering, they were probably sour anyway. And just like that, sour grapes became the official slogan of coping mechanisms everywhere. As kids, this seems like a silly excuse, but as adults, oh, we've all been that fox. Didn't get the job? That company was toxic anyway. Rejected by a crush? Pfft, not even my type. We've mastered the fine art of pretending we never wanted what we couldn't have. It's not always bad, sometimes it's self-preservation. But deep down we all know that fox is lying to himself. But the big question is, why? You see, it's possibly a coping mechanism or our way of not wanting to accept defeat. After all, why admit you failed when you can simply tell yourself a more delusional but different version of reality? That's the true essence of The Fox and the Grapes. On the surface, it's a simple fable about envy and disappointment, but as adults, we recognize it for what it really is, a story about how we protect our egos when life doesn't go our way. It's why even though we laughed at the fox's frustration as kids, as adults we kind of see his logic. Because the truth is, admitting that we really wanted something and didn't get it, that stings. It forces us to sit with feelings of inadequacy, rejection and failure. So instead, we rewrite the narrative. We pretend the things we wanted wasn't worth wanting in the first place. But if it wasn't worth it, why even bother at all? Because just like we said, it's a defense mechanism. One we all use to soften the blow of disappointment. And while defense mechanisms aren't exactly bad, they stop us from confronting our real emotions. Instead of acknowledging that we feel hurt, we cover it up with bitterness and pretend we never cared. So, what's the real tragedy of the story? It isn't that the fox failed to get the grapes, it's that he walked away without learning anything. Instead of trying a different approach, asking for help, or even accepting that failure is part of life, he gave up and convinced himself the goal was meaningless. And that's where we, as adults, have a choice. When we don't get what we want, do we pretend we never wanted it? Or do we acknowledge the disappointment, learn from it, and find another way to reach our goals? Because the truth is, the grapes were never sour. The fox just didn't know how to handle failure, and maybe, just maybe, neither do we. But wait, what if we view the story from another perspective? One that paints the fox as wise. Hear us out. We usually interpret the fable as a lesson about sour grapes, the way we lie to ourselves when we fail. But what if the fox wasn't making excuses? What if instead he was freeing himself from pointless desire? Think about it. The fox jumps, reaches, strains, he gives it an honest shot. But when it's clear the grapes are out of reach, he doesn't dwell on his failure. He doesn't sit there sulking, feeling sorry for himself. He doesn't keep trying, endlessly exhausting himself over something that just isn't happening. Instead, he shrugs and walks away. Could that be self-deception, or is it emotional intelligence? Let's find out. In life, we're constantly told to never give up and to keep chasing our dreams. But if we're being real, sometimes the best thing we can do is let go. We don't like to admit it, but some things just aren't meant for us. Some jobs, some relationships, some dreams, they're like those grapes, hanging just out of reach. And the fox? He understands something many of us don't. Desire is only as powerful as the meaning we attach to it. By convincing himself the grapes weren't worth it, he takes away their power over him. He doesn't let disappointment turn into obsession. He doesn't let frustration consume him. He simply moves on. So in the end, maybe the fox's little trick isn't self-deception, but self-preservation. In a world where we are constantly told to want more, chase more, and achieve more, maybe there's wisdom in knowing when to say, not worth it. Maybe there's freedom in rewriting the story so that failure doesn't sting, so that unfulfilled desires don't linger. Aesop's fables might be ancient, but their lessons still slap. Whether it's knowing when to pace yourself, why credibility matters, or how to handle failure, these stories aren't just childhood relics, they are roadmaps for surviving adulthood. So, which fable hit you differently as an adult? Drop your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more nostalgic deep dives.